So, hello everyone. In this video, we have to discuss about the transaction flow of the object, transaction flow of the business object that we have created. So, in previous video, we have discussed about our event handling, webhook event handling, how our payment integration system will handle the events that are coming from Stripe system through webhook. And we have seen all the cases like whenever a transaction failed, then we have to call the get session to know the session from Stripe API, and then if the payment is failed, then we have to call the expire API to the Stripe system, and then in this way you can mark the payment status as failed in our system also, in Stripe API system also. So today in this video you have to see the full transaction flow of an object, how it is flowing through our system from front end. You have to see in these things. So first of all, we have to go to the figure. Hello. Now, if we see our architecture of our payment integration systems, like suppose this is our payment integration system. Yes, there are three microservices, we already know about it, and after that, our payment validation service is going to help to validate the transaction. In that transaction, we know that in payment validation service, whenever user clicks on the pay now button, as we previously seen in the Stripe documentation, client send or order information. Wait, Stripe posted page. Okay, yeah. Client side order information and checkout session is created, as we know it previously, that we've already seen about this previously, but right now our goal is to show the transaction flow. Now whenever create checkout session is created, then API will be called to Stripe system, and Stripe will redirect, Stripe will send a JSON object in which a redirect URL is there, and the user has to redirect to that URL and make the payment in the Stripe posted page. So we all know about this. So after that, now we have to see how the transaction flow will happen in our system. So here we got a transaction object for our transaction object that were created in our system, like transaction object. Or is it wrong? Transaction object. Pojo. Here is our transaction object. According to that object, we are created a JSON object from ChatGPT, and that JSON object is going to as request to our system, and this object is going to in the request in our payment validation service first. In our payment validation service, payment, what is payment? In payment validation service, this object will be come whenever user hit the pay now button. Then in this user information, the JSON object will come to the payment validation service. Like in this, the user ID will be there, the payment method ID, either means it's a credit card or alternative payment methods. Provider ID, which type of provider the user is choose, like payment provider ID like Stripe, and the payment type either it is a sale or it is a subscription based payment. Then all the information from the user side, from the client side, are stored as a JSON object from the client side, and it will be sent to our payment integration system. And here all the details about the client and all the required details, that the details were concerned in our payment integration system. That details were only we have to receive from client side, and this JSON object will be received to our payment validation service. After that, some validation logic will be applied to that object, and after that, the payment validation service call an API to our payment processing service, and at that time, the JSON object will be send as a request to our controller layer to payment processing service. The first layer, as we know, the microservice architecture, all the microservice architecture having layered application, means layered structure. In that layered structure, every microservice has controller layer, service layer, and DAO layer. So for that, whenever the JSON object will be sent as a request to the payment processing service from payment validation service, then the JSON object will come to control layer first. Then so we have to see the controller layer, how this object will come to our controller layer. In the coding we have to see. So first we open the controller layer, payment controller. So in this, first in this we have to see, as we already see that request mapping is used to map the current map the endpoint from client side. That is a annotation is used for mapping the endpoint. Request mapping like V1 payments. If we go to the V1 payments, control T endpoints like V1 slash payments. If this URL is hit, then this request will come to the this request will come okay, this request will come to the payment controller. Then after that, in payment controller class, here we create a method process request. We create a method process request, which transaction object, the transaction object coming from the payment validation side, it will pass as an argument. That JSON object is passed as an argument into the process request method of payment controller. Process request method of payment controller. And here the request body annotation is used to convert the JSON object into the respective Java object. The request body annotation is used for converting the JSON object into our respective Java object, which we have created as a transaction object in Pojo class. So after that, the JSON object is converted into JSON object. JSON object is converted into Java object. After that, after that, after go through the coding that payments start payment processing. Payment processing will be started. The then we have to map the transaction object, the transaction object which is converted, the JSON object is converted into transaction object which we have created in our system. That the transaction object is mapped to transaction DTO object. Why DTO object is required? Because we can take same object, same transaction object. You can use same transaction object in the service layer, in the Java layer, because for the security reason we have to change the state of an object. Like here transaction object, we can't use the same object for all the layer. We have to change the object in all the layer. So for that, transaction object will be converted to transaction DTO object, and the transaction DTO object is used in the service layer. Transaction DTO object can be accessible in the Java layer. Means the same object, but you can make different forms of that object to use in different layers. For the security reason, like transaction object, we have to convert it into transaction DTO object, and that DTO object will be used in the whole service layer. After that, if we use if we go to the Java layer, then the transaction entity object we have to convert it into transaction entity object, and the transaction entity object is interacting with the database. So for that we have to see, like here by using, here we auto add. The auto add means auto add is used for dependency injection in our Spring container. So here private model mapper mm created. Here we can inject the dependency by using auto add. Here you can inject the dependency by using auto add, but here Sonarlit is advised that you can use constructor dependency instead of auto add. Instead of auto add, you can use constructor dependency in place of auto add, because it is more the priority of constructor injection will be more. So that's why we are injecting as a constructor, injecting dependency by constructor. Here model mapper payment status. Here all, if we delete this constructor, suppose we delete this constructor, and we can use @auto AutoAdd here. Same, I can use AutoAdd here. Then there is no problem to use AutoAdd. You can directly inject the dependency here in the payment controller class for these two classes. So here the SonarLint is advised that open description rule. Here SonarLint is advised that it will be better if you go through the build dependencies should be avoided. Dependency injection famous as Spring support dependency injection by using untraces such as @init.py. These untraces can be used to inject beans by a constructor, setter, and field injection. Generally speaking, field injection is discouraged. Field injection is discouraged. It allows here we did the thing as a field injection. It allows the creation of object in an invalid state and makes testing more difficult. So depending on so here SonarLint advised to use constructor injection in place of field injection. So we have to go through the SonarLint advised. So for that we can use Control Z constructor reference, constructor injection, constructor dependency injection. So here after the dependency is injected in the payment controller class for the here model mapper class and payment service class, payment status service class, delivered payment service status class. So we will go through it. See, a model mapper class is model mapper class object is injected in the payment controller by the help of constructor. So here constructor injection will be done. So after that, the transaction object is converted into transaction DTO object. Transaction DTO object. After that, the transaction here we provide a log to know the transaction DTO object. After that, again, if we want to in a layered application structure, if you want to communicate between the layers, means, if you want to send data from one layer to another layer, then you have to communicate through the interfaces. That is the standard. We have to communicate with by the interfaces from one layer to another layer, from controller layer to if you want to communicate to the service layer, then you have to use interface. Then if you want to communicate between the service layer and DAO layer, then you have to use interface. So for that, we have to create one interface to talking with the service layer from payment controller layer. This is payment controller layer, payment controller class. This is payment controller layer. So we have to create an interface. So we already created an interface. So what is that interface? That interface is payment status service. We have created a payment interface that is payment status service, and it contains an abstract method which is nothing but process status, which is nothing but process status. Here the payment controller system containing the same method name, and payment status service also containing the same method name. You can change the names as per your requirement. So here you can change the name also, it's not a problem. So here the name is same, it's not affect our code, so name will be same. Like you can change your name as per your requirement or as per your choice. So here also in payment status service we created an abstract method. As you know that in interface we can only create the abstract method. Not only abstract method, we can create static and default methods and private methods also from the 8 and 9. So here we take one abstract method from interface. So to communicate from the controller layer to service layer. So for that, we have created a abstract method as process status. In that process status, we have to provide the transaction DTO object as an argument. Here in payment controller class, we convert in payment controller class. Take the we take the JSON object as an argument, and here by the using request body answer, we convert the JSON object from the JSON object to transaction object. After that, the transaction object will map to transaction DTO object, and it will convert to transaction DTO object. That DTO object is provided to the abstract method of payment status service that we have created. Abstract method of payment status service. As we know that if there is an interface, then we have to create the implementation class for that interface. Then the payment status service, we create an interface as payment status service, and payment status service implementation. IMPL is the implementation class of the payment status service. So it has the implementation of the abstract method of payment status service. So we'll go through it. So for that, payment controller. In payment controller, here we auto add or not auto add, we inject the dependency by using constructor in payment controller class of the payment status service interface. Payment status service interface. Sorry, payment status service object. We inject the dependency by using constructor. So for that, then we call the process status method of service layer. Payment status service. We have to call the payment status service. Here is the object of payment status service, and through that object we call the process status method of payment status service, and it takes as an argument transaction DT object. So first you have to convert the transaction object into transaction DT, then the transaction DT object is passed as an argument to the process status method of payment status service. Then you have to go to the payment status service implementation and see the transaction DT object. Here in the payment controller layer, we provide transaction DT object. Transaction DT object to the process status method of payment status service, and payment status service implementation is the implementation method of implementation class of payment status service interface. In that, we have to see actual implementation of the process status method. So for that, the transaction DTO is the transaction DTO object exists from the payment controller layer to the service layer. In this layer, from the payment controller layer, transaction object is converted to transaction DTO and passed to service layer. So here, okay, passed to service layer. Then you have to provide some logs that payment service implementation process payment status is going on, and to print the transaction DTO, it's a log. So after that, we have to create one enum, means one constant, that transaction status enum for mapping the receipt object and get the enum. According to that enum, we have to get the handler from transaction factory object, from payment status factory object, payment status factory method, payment status factory class or method. Here in this line, we get the transaction DT object, transaction DT object. In transaction DT object, we get transaction status ID. Transaction DT object, if we see, transaction status ID is created. Transaction status ID is created. So here we get the transaction DTO dot get transaction status ID. Here the value is created, and we created enum as per the what is the enum? Constants. Here payment method enum, transaction status enum, transaction status enum. Here the transaction status enum is there. So here we created enums, like created inserted all the enums, and here the ID, and these are the constants. The constants, and if you want to get the enum, then you have to provide. If you provide ID, then you have to create a method like get by ID. Then you can get the created value, created enum. Like that, we have created a value as get by name, because the receipt object payment transaction status ID is in string format. So for that, we have to provide the string name. That string is ID, string transaction status ID, and according to that, we can get the respective enum. These are the logic. This is the for each loop. Transaction status enum status. Here the for each loop will work. Values will return the array of the transaction array of the enum, and each value will be stored in status variable, and the status dot get name dot equals name. If the provided name is created, here in the code, if the provided name is created, and the status dot get name is also created, dot equals created, then return that object, that status. So with this logic, you can get the actual enum. For that, you can go payment status service implementation. For this transaction DTO get transaction ID, here we got the created value, and by the created value, we got the status enum. We get the enum, and according to that enum, we have to provide that enum to get the handler means we already created a payment status factory method. We already created a factory method to get the object, of which type of handler should act as per the transaction object. Which type of handler should invoke, which type of handler should execute its method to handle the transaction object that handle the transaction object, handle the transaction object value. So for that, you get the enum, and we already created a payment status factory, Java. Payment status factory class. It contains a factory method. It contains a factory method. The payment status factory it contains a factory method. That method name is get handler. Get handler, and it will take enum, and according to that enum, it will return the respective handler to the respective handler to the method. So for that, if status name is created, then return created status handler. Create the object here. Created status handler context.getBean. Here we directly don't get the object of handlers. Here we auto add the application context. By the application context getBean method, we can get the object of the required classes. If it didn't mention that application context, it didn't injected that application context object to the container, then we have to create for all the objects, like wherever it is required or not required, we have to create all the objects for the all the handlers. So for that, we just created an application context, and by using application context, we can get the object of the handler who whatever we required in the according to the transaction values, we can get the handler objects. So here we have created one handler for our because the object is only contents created. For that we have testing. So for that we only created one handler that is created here. Created status handler is we get the object to create status handler by application context.getBean created status handler class with the syntax. So here we return the CSH created status handler to the get handler method. And in payment status service implemented here. From here we have to go. From here we gone to the suppose here get status handler. Here we gone to the get handler method, and in get handler method we got the created status handler object, and return back. Here we got the payment created status handler object, and we stored it in the payment status handler, because payment status handler is a abstract class that we have created, that we already created. Payment status handler is the abstract class, and it contains a abstract method that processes status, and it will receive transaction to the object. And in service implementation, get handler, according to the get handler we got the, like if we go through the so here not here here, as we know that one abstract we forgot about this. So here is an abstract class payment status handler, which is in the service layer, which is stored in the service layer. Which is stored in the service layer, which will be stored in the service layer. It's used for getting the handlers like that. Payment status handler. Here we got the object of created status handler, and we have to store that object into the payment status handler reference variable, that is status handler, because payment status handler is an abstract class. So here by the get handler method of payment status factory, because by using the factory method we get the handler, get the handler object, that is created status handler. It may be initiated status handler, it may be failed status handler, it may be success status handler, but right now we are only concerned about the create status handler, and we by the get handler method, and we have and we by providing status enum we got the created status handler object, and that object is stored in the reference variable of payment status handler, because payment status handler is an abstract class. Then by payment status handler we call the abstract method or process status method of payment status handler object. According to that, the process status method will be executed. Here we got the object of created status handler. So as we know, this process is known as upcasting in Java. Upcasting in Java. As we know, this process is known as upcasting in Java, because we got by this process we got the object of created status handler, which is the implementing a created status handler is the implementing class of payment status handler. And payment status handler is an object, is an abstract class. Payment status handler contains abstract method is abstract method, that is process status, and all the implementing classes like created status handler and all the remaining classes are implemented the process status method. So here by get handler, here by get handler, status factory is an object of payment status factory class, and by the help of get handler is a factory method to give us to object whatever we require. So for that, by using status factory object, and by using factory method we got the object of created status handler, got the object of the implemented class of payment status handler, that is created status handler, and that created status handler object will be stored in the payment status handler reference variable. According to that reference variable, we call the process status method. So here in that reference variable, we have the object of created status handler. So according to the instance type, that we know that in method overriding, according to the instance type, the method will be executed. So here we achieve upcasting in this line. In the 33 number of line, we achieve upcasting, and here the method overriding will be implemented from core Java, that status handler, that process status. Here in status handler, the created status handler object is stored, and by using created status handler object, we call the process status method. So here we call the created status handler process status method, and pass the transaction entity object. Pass the transaction entity object to the process status method. Okay. Then we have to see what will happen to the transaction entity object in the process status method. So here right now, first of all, when we got the JSON object from the controller from payment validated service, and here we convert the JSON object to transaction object, and the transaction object in controller layer is passed to the service layer. Here in controller layer only, we converted the transaction object into transaction entity object, and that passed to the service layer. Service layer means payment status service. Payment status service IMPL method. Sorry, IMPL class. Through interfaces we have to communicate. So for that, payment status service, we pass that object to the payment status service IMPL class. Method is process status. To that there are two similar methods, so we can change the method's name. So here the transaction entity object is passed to the payment status service process status method. Payment status service IMPL class process status method. In that okay, IMPL here process status method, we have the transaction entity object. By that entity object we extract the transaction status ID, and according to the transaction status ID we provide we got the respective status enum, and according to the status enum, we got the object of respective status handler. Respective status handler. Here in the status handler, we got created status handler object, and according to that, we have to execute the process status method. So in process status method, control D, created status handler. Let's see what will happen to the transaction DTO object, that our business object. What will happen in created status handler? Because created status handler means that the transaction status ID is created. So here we know payment status handler it extends because um, it extends the abstract class. If you want to implement an abstract class in Java, then we use extend keyword. So for that, so in process status method, that is a method of created status handler, that is implemented method of created status and implemented method of payment status handler. This payment status handler is an abstract class which contains process status. Here in created status handler is an extending class of payment status handler. So here we have to provide the mandatorily provide the process status methods implementation. Here we receive transaction data object as we have previously seen that in from service IMPL, payment service IMPL. Here we receive transaction data object, process status transaction data object. This process status will go to this method. This method will be executed here. The full description of the method is here. So in this object, in this method, the transaction data object which was received, it will call the create transaction method of transaction DAO, transaction DAO interface, transaction DAO class. Here in the service layer, one one class is there, that is created status handler, created status handler, created status handler, created status handler class. Created status handler, created status handler class. In that created status handler, because right now if you want to talk to DAO layer from service layer, then definitely you need an interface to talk with the DAO layer. So for that, we have created, right now just stop here, and we have created the transaction DAO interface. Here interface, transaction DAO interface, and transaction DAO interface. DAO layer, you know that DAO layer is used for communicating the database. So for that, we already know that create transaction is a method, is an abstract method of transaction DAO. Then in subclass, we have to implement that method. We already know about this. The create transaction method is an abstract method of transaction DAO interface. Through that interface, we have to communicate from service layer to database layer. So here in payment, payment status service IMPL, and if you go to the created status handler, in that we auto add the transaction DAO object. We auto add the transaction DAO object. So then to communicate with the DAO layer, transaction DAO layer, communicate with the transaction DAO layer, we have to inject the dependency of transaction DAO in the created status handler. Because the status handler is the actual class which will handling the transaction object status. According to that status, we have to store the value, store the object value in our database. So for that, we just inject the dependency of transaction DAO by using auto-add annotation in created status handler class. And as we previously seen that in process status method of created status handler, we provided in previous class, in that payment service IMPL class, we provided the transaction DTO object. Here payment status service IMPL, here we provided transaction transaction DTO object. Transaction DTO object. Right now, if we go to the created status handler, where is created status handler? Created status handler. Then here, that created status handler is class is going to be communicated here. Here, the created status handler class is going to be communicated with the DAO layer. It's going to be communicated with the communicate with the DAO layer. So we have to inject the dependency of DAO, transaction DAO, in the created status handler class. So for that, just we inject the dependency of transaction DAO in a created status handler method, and we already seen that created status handler method, created status handler class having a process status method from abstract class, and the implementing class should have provided implementation to the abstract methods of abstract class. So for that, in process status, as you seen in the payment status service IMPL class, we are calling the process status method of created status handler, and here we provide transaction DTO object. We are still in the service layer. Still in the service layer. This created status handler class is in the service layer. Here, the process status method. This is transaction DTO object. Here, process status method. This is transaction DTO object. Here, still in the service layer. Here, the transaction DTO object. And here, the transaction DAO dependency object. Injected the dependency of transaction DAO because created status handler. So after that, transaction DAO. By using transaction DAO object, we call the method of create transaction. The transaction DAO object. By using transaction DAO object, we call the create transaction method. Create transaction method is nothing but an abstract method of transaction DAO interface, and transaction DAO implementation is an implementing class of transaction DAO interface, and in that implementing class, we provide implementation of the create transaction method. So here in create transaction method, we provide the transaction DTO object. Let's see what will happen in create transaction method. Here from this layer, here it's works create status handler is here is, the whole work is still now in service layer. Right now, whenever create transaction method is called, then we have then right now we are going to the DAO layer. This is the DAO layer. Here we receive create transaction. We receive transaction DTO object to the create transaction method as an argument. Transaction DTO object is received as an argument to the create transaction method. So here, by using in that create transaction method in the DAO layer. Here right now we are in DAO layer. You can see the transaction DAO implement transaction DAO interface. So for that, here also. Here right now here is what our work is convert the transaction DTO object into transaction entity. Convert the transaction DTO object into transaction entity. So for that we auto-add the model mapper MM. We can auto-add by constructor also. That's not a problem. So yeah, Sonali is already advised that if you use constructor injection in constructor injection rather than auto-add field injection. So this process of injection is known as field injection. So better to use constructor injection rather than field injection. So for that, so forgot about that. That will be optional. You can use any type of injection for that. So here in create transaction method, we receive transaction DTO object. Right now, we just convert the transaction DTO object in map. Convert the transaction DTO object to transaction entity object. To transaction entity object. Transaction entity object. Transaction entity class we have to create the transaction entity object just with the transaction object, transaction business object. Here transaction entity object is converted to transaction entity object. And that entity object which is, but here there is a twist that in transaction DTO object, transaction DTO, what is transaction DTO? In transaction DTO object, these are all string. These are all string. Payment method ID, provider ID, payment type ID, transaction status ID, and it's similar to the JSON object, the requested object. But whenever we converted this transaction DTO object to transaction entity object, then that time the data type will be changed. Then how we can map from string to int by using for the same fields, for the same fields, how we can map from string data type to integer data type. For that we created some converters and some constants like payment method enums by the help of enums like one APM, one APM. If you provide APM, by the APM you can get the enum. You can get the enum. If you provide APM from, suppose here we get here in question, here the payment method ID is APM. According to that APM, if you provide APM, get by name, string name. If you provide APM, method name. If you provide APM, then we can get the APM object. From that APM object, we can get the ID. Like that, we have to create some enums, doing some operation, but doing some map from string data type to int data type, the same fields. So after that, we have to go for transaction data. Okay. So here we convert the transaction DTO object to transaction entity object. And in transaction entity object, the four fields we have seen, the four fields have string data type. These four fields have string data type. But in transaction entity object, these four fields having integer data type. So we have to take help of enums to convert that string to integer. So that is not the main thing. So here we convert the transaction entity to transaction entity object. Okay. Right now we just implement Spring Boot JDBC. We take the help of Spring Boot JDBC to Spring Boot JDBC to implement means to store data, means to communicate with the database, to performing CRUD operations in database. We take the help of Spring Boot JDBC and name the parameter JDBC template is a class of Spring Boot JDBC framework, Spring Boot JDBC module. So by the help of name parameter JDBC template, we just here string SQL inserted in transaction in convert our database. You can push the data, you can insert the data. Like here is SQL query to insert the data that we are gonna receive from the client side. Here insert data like key holder is also an class of Spring Boot JDBC, and bean property SQL parameters resource. Here this is also a class of Spring Boot JDBC framework. Here in this class we just provide, here we convert transaction entity object to transaction entity object, and here we provide transaction entity object to that bean property SQL parameter source. The name itself defines that the bean property SQL parameter source means from the transaction entity object, whatever fields are there in the transaction entity object, it will has the same name. It will map the same name in the SQL parameter. It will have the same name to the SQL parameter, and it will perform the CRUD option according to the name. Here, if we take name parameter example, and here by using name parameter template, we call the updated method to insert the data in our database, and here we pass SQL object to this, and params object which will map our transaction entity fields to the SQL parameter. Our transaction entity field name should be same as the SQL parameter names. Otherwise, it will show an error. So for that, we use bean property SQL parameter source. Bean means here bean is the transaction entity bean, Bean property. Property means all the fields of the transaction entity, and SQL parameter source means bean property. So it is same as the SQL parameter names, and source means the transaction entity is the source. For that, just we have to store that store that into an object, and here we pass in JDBC the name parameter JDBC template that updated method. Just pass the SQL statement and the params object and that key holder. What is the use of key holder? Key holder is the class in JDBC Spring Boot module. JDBC Spring Boot JDBC module, which is take the primary key from the database, which will take the auto-generated primary key that is we have mentioned in the auto-generated. Key holder work is to generate key holder. Key holder is an interface. So generated key holder is the implementing class of key holder. So by using key holder, we can just whenever by using this class, whenever we update the data in our database, at that time, same time, the key holder will fetch the ID, fetch the primary key, and it will store it into its object, like key holder new string ID, it will store to by the MySQL bench. Okay. So here key holder work is to it will get the transaction. If you see transaction here, if you see it's auto generated. If at the time of insertion, at the time of data insertion, key holder is picking up the auto generated value, auto generated ID value, and according to that value, new string ID, according to that value, like key holder dot get key into value, and we just store it into one transaction ID. Here in this line, we just inserted our data successfully that we have received from the client side. We have just inserted the object successfully in our database, and right now our work is to get the response back to the requester, wherever the to the validation service. In order to the validation service, we have written back our response. Whatever response is the minimal response is required for the payment validation service to going forward with the further logic. So for that, they need some. It's based on requirement. If they need, then we have to provide the response. If they don't need, then we don't have to provide the response, because here we provide the response object, and we just provide the necessary information or all the object fields. We have to, only we are going to provide the necessary object fields to the payment validation service. So for that we are using the key holder. Key holder work is to just fetch the primary key from the database whenever the user is trying to update the data or trying to insert the data. Key holder work is to just fetch the primary key at the time. So here in this line, here we got the transaction DTO object to in the create transaction. Here right now we are in DAO layer. Transaction method is a method of transaction DAO implementation, and create transaction takes the transaction DTO object from service layer, and in that here in this line it will convert to the transaction entity object, and the transaction DAO the four fields having string type, but here it is int type, so we just use enums for converting that. So here transaction entity object is converted to transaction entity object, and that transaction entity object is successfully inserted to our database. And at that time, whenever the data is inserted to the database, just by using key holder, we just get the key. We just get the key, means primary key, and store it into a separate variable. And right now, we just do one thing. We have to send till here, not here, till here. We successfully, no, no, here. We successfully just inserted our transaction object or business object in our database. We successfully inserted our business object to our database. Successfully flow from the validation layer to the database is done here. Like from payment validation service, we got the transaction object. From payment validation service, we got the transaction object, and in controller layer, we convert that transaction checked by using request body to the respective Java object, the transaction object, and the transaction object is converted to transaction DTO object in service layer. And here in the controller layer only, we convert the transaction object to transaction DTO and um, provide the transaction DTO object to the service layer. And in service layer, the transaction DTO object will work. And after that, the transaction DTO object is provided to the DAO layer through the here in created status handler. It will communicate to the DAO like created status handler method of process request. We just provide transaction to object through the transaction in the created status handler. We call transaction DAO implementation transaction DAO method create transaction in created status handler, and we provide the transaction DTO object to DAO layer. Transaction DTO object to DAO layer. And here in the DAO layer, the transaction object is mapping to transaction entity. After that, the fields are successfully inserted to our database in this line. The fields are successfully inserted to our database. After that, in that time, in the simultaneously we got the primary key value by using key holder method, key holder class. That key holder class is nothing but a string JDBC framework class, module class. Then right now just send the response back. Send the response back with only the needed fields. We have to send the response back to the payment validation service. For further logic or further reference to go for the logic. So for that, we just get the transaction ID, means primary key, by using keyboard. And here transaction DTO, in this, if you see here, there is no ID present, because ID is auto generated in our database. So for that, we just don't provide any ID, but our transaction DTO object contains ID. We already know that transaction DTO object is containing ID. So we don't provide any ID value to the transaction object whenever the because transaction ID should be created in our database as implemented. It will be treated as a primary key, so we can provide in the JSON object. So in the JSON object, the only the required information we will get from the client side. So for that, right now just where transaction implementation. Here we got the primary key from database that is generated in database. Here we got the primary key, and right now just set the ID value to the transaction DTO object. To the transaction DTO object, to the transaction DTO object, we just set the ID value to the transaction DTO object. Set the ID value. Right now the transaction DTO object having some ID. Get the ID means which ID the transaction is completed in the data is inserted in the database. For that, we get the transaction ID. And that transaction ID and the transaction ID is set to the transaction DTO object. And the transaction DTO object in the reverse manner we have to go for. The transaction DTO object right now is returning back to the create transaction method. So for that, return type the create transaction is transaction DTO. So right now going backward from transaction DTO object, we got the here the transaction DTO object is returned to the transaction DTO create transaction method. And that create transaction method is called in created status handler. Created status handler in the service layer. So for that we have to go to the created status handler. Here create transaction method will be called. Here in the transaction DTO transaction create transaction method, we got the object of, because the return type of data transaction method is transaction DTO. So here by calling this method we get the object of transaction DTO, and right now we store the transaction DTO object into transaction DTO type, and again that transaction DTO object is returned back to the process status method of created status handler, created status handler class. Right now that the created status handler process status method is called in payment status service implementation class. Then we have written back payment status service implementation Java. Here the process status method of created status handler is called. So the process status method data type is transaction DTO. So here we got the transaction DTO object by calling the process status method. We got, because the return type of process status object method is transaction DTO. Here we got the transaction DTO object, and the transaction DTO object will be stored in transaction DTO, the transaction DTO object. The transaction DTO object will be we got the transaction DTO object, and we have to just create another reference of transaction DTO class and just store the object in the transaction DTO reference. And again, we just return the transaction DTO object. Directly, you can write you can write this return here, but for the code reader, we will just write here. So that same the transaction DTO object, but the transaction DTO object right now containing some ID, containing the primary ID, in which ID the data is inserted. The transaction DTO object contains the ID. Transaction DTO object is containing the ID. Again, that transaction DTO object is returning back to the process status method of payment status service implementation. Payment status service implementation. And payment status service implementation process status method is called in payment controller class. So right now you have to go the payment controller class. In payment controller class, we just we just call the payment status service process status method, and we got by calling the process status method of payment service payment status service implementation class. Here the process status method return type is transaction DTO. It is already shown that transaction DTO is the return type. Here also the same transaction DTO object is coming back to the controller layer, coming back to the controller layer by using the process status method, because the process status return type is transaction DTO. So the same transaction DTO object is flowing back to the controller layer, and just we store the transaction DTO object here in the reference variable, and again we just create a transaction response object, transaction response. In that just we created a two, because in transaction DTO object we have many fields, like we have many fields, but for the payment validation service, for the validation microservices, these many fields are not required, or we have not to provide these many data to the payment validation service. Only the needed data we should provide about the transaction. Just we have to inform that the transaction is stored, that the transaction object value is stored successfully in your database. For that, you just take the ID and take the reference that it is stored. For that only, we just created a transaction reference in which just created a private ID and private transaction status ID. Just we have to provide, we have to give the confirmation to the payment validation service that for the same ID, for the same primary key, the data is inserted and the transaction status is created. The transaction status is either created and inserted, or for that whatever will happen. Just inform, just provide information that the coming transaction object is successfully stored in the database. For that, we just you just receive that response. According to that response, the payment validation layer will be considered that the data will be inserted or updated or something will happen in with the database. According to that, the response will be come. So for that, here in payment controller, we just create another variable transaction response, and in the transaction response, just create an object. And in the response object, transaction response is set ID from the response DT object. That DT object flowing back from the flowing back from the DAO layer. The same DT object or maybe different. The DT object is flowing back to the flowing back from the data DAO layer to the payment controller layer. Here, the payment controller layer we just created another transaction response object and just created two fields to just give confirmation to the payment value that something will happen in the transaction object that will receive from the is received from the client side. So for that, created a response transaction response object and just set ID from the transaction DTO. Just here transaction from the transaction DTO object that coming back from the database that coming that flow from that coming back from the database to the payment controller. From that transaction DTO, we just get the primary ID that we get from the database by using keyword. Get the ID and that ID is provided to the response object for the setting. That ID is provided to the response object and that status response here just get the transaction status and just provide the transaction status ID to the response object. And again, right now returning the response, just we can directly return the response object uh, response object to the payment validation service. But here some means here we just taking help of another class that is response entity. It is a class to means it is a class which is used for means modifying the HTTP status code. For that means suppose if the status code is 200 means the transaction is successful again. Right now, if the status code is 200, the process successfully, then the successfully is the coming object or the coming transaction is successful. That is the HTTP status code of 200. If the HTTP status code is 200, then the transaction is successful. Then we have to consider the transaction is successful. If you provide extra information to the requester from to the payment validation service or to the requester, if you want to provide an extra information, then we just change the HTTP status code. Like if the HTTP status code is 201, then it indicates that the process is successfully successful, the transaction is successful, and it created a resource. Means it created a resource means the data is successfully fetched in the database. Means in the database the resource is created. So that information will be provided by the transaction response entity. So for that, just get the transaction detail and that provided that ID and status to the response object, and just create the object of response entity, and just provided HTTP status that created. If you go to the created Spring framework created the uh, it is a Spring framework class. So if you go to the created, the 201 series successful created 201 series are successful created. It is showing that the resource is created. It's showing just successful. Okay, means successful. It's showing that successful and created. So for that, we just use that transaction entity, response entity, and just provide the response object to that. And uh, this line is used for only modifying the status HTTP status code. For that, just provide the response object or the required update by the payment controller or the requester. Just provide that object to the response entity and create and we just return that response entity object to the process request method of payment controller. Process method of payment controller. Here payment controller again process request method, and it will and the object will return back to the validation layer. Payment validation layer as a response. Whatever till now, just to know the flow of the transaction object it's coming from the validation layer and going to the payment controller layer and storing, going to the service layer and DAO layer and recording and store the respective data, store the transaction in, store the transaction in database and just fetch the transaction response and map with the transaction DB object or fetch the response from the database and only provide the required information to the request. That is the full flow of the transaction, how it will work in our system and just response. Let's do we have to right now just we have to test once what will happen. Okay, sorry. What will be coming back as a response? We have to try once. So your transaction ID is 96. We have to change the transaction ID 96 for before that. Okay, just transaction ID 96, just number 97, and we just hit send. Error in console. Error means it's not started yet. So for that we have to start Ranaj. Ranaj, we have started the server. Maven build clean boot run skip test run. Our system server is going to be run. Our Spring Boot application is going to be run. Yeah, the system is up and running right now. Just hit the request and see what the response we will get from the payment intelligence system in our system. So for that, just send the request. Here we get only ID and transaction status is created. Right now go to the database. We are just seeing the transaction reference 97. Here if we refresh the data, then 11. The ID is 11 that we are receiving here. The ID is 11 and the transaction status is created. We already know that. And the transaction reference is TXN 67897. Transaction reference is 67897. That we are providing 67897 in the request. Again, we have to try to do one more request. Suppose 98. We send, then ID is 12 and the data is already input. Refresh. The data is inserted. The transaction is inserted in our database. The transaction is inserted in our database. And the transaction reference is what we are providing the what the client what will the client send as the request transaction ID from the e-commerce side. So that will be stored in our database. So again client did the again client send a request, suppose send a transaction, suppose that 99. Again client send a transaction with some relevant data about user or about the transaction from with some relevant data about the transaction. Client just send a request, and whenever he get the send the request, he get the respective response as ID 13 and transaction is created. That's coming from our system and the transaction is successfully stored in our database like 13 799. So this way we know the full flow of the transaction, how it will work through our payment integration system. So that's all for the video. So right now I just stop.